Guys, hope you're good. Welcome to another session of computer architecture, looking at the third part of chapter number 28, which is securing your computing systems. Now, remember the last time we had sessions, we mentioned that we're going to be quickly looking at data classification as well as compliance in this one, as well as delving into what is happening with licensing when you're discussing computer configurations there. So remember, if you look at it, let's go back to one of our very first sessions. I think we mentioned that there's a distinctive difference between data and information. And remember, we mentioned that data is basically raw facts and figures, and then information is any processed data material that you can find or that you typically deal with. But in this instance, data is delving into something that's usable, something that is of a meaningful substance. And there are specific ways that you deal with data, especially when you're looking at it from a security configuration, and especially when you're trying to safeguard content that you have as an individual, and obviously content that you have from an organizational or institutionalized platform. So obviously more on the professional space as far as using computer systems are concerned. Now, data classification is all about segmenting or putting data in specific locations according to its sensitivity. So remember, there are certain instances where specific sets of data can be accessible to everyone or accessible to the public, and then there are certain data platforms that are reserved, for lack of a better term, to specific individuals within either an institution or organization. So that's what classification is all about, just making sure that you categorize data properly in accordance to its sensitivity. On the other hand, compliance now is looking at abiding by the rules and procedures of a specific organization in terms of accessing or working with that data. So classification is segmenting or categorizing, and then when you're looking at compliance, is now abiding to certain rules and procedures. And obviously, if you break those rules, it means that you are non-compliant when you're dealing with your specific data set there. The other thing now that works hand in hand with this compliance is licensing. And I think from a software platform, there's massive piracy that is typically happening across the globe. Um, with content being easily accessible, maybe with others arguing that these software packages are quite pricey, but ultimately it's always imperative and it's always important for you guys to do the right thing, because remember, I think I did give some of these examples in class that most of you are studying towards software development degree platforms there. And you can imagine you developing a certain app, as brilliant as it is, and these particular apps are being used for free when someone is supposed to be paying for it. Obviously, it detrimentally affects you as the actual developer, and it's a massive abuse, especially if you're looking at intellectual properties, whichever way you look at it. So it's now important to understand what licensing is all about and what are the different categories associated with licensing. I think the main thing to focus on is, I think some of you might want to then ask that, okay, look, what's happening as far as these particular categories are concerned? And I think the two main ones are commercial and non-commercial. So as the name would say, commercial is something that you need to buy. All right. So in order for you to actually use a specific a software package, you buy it. What you're actually buying more often than not, arguably, is not the actual software itself, but the license. Because remember, when you buy the license, you've authorized, or you've for some for lack of a better term, you've made that whole purchase or usage authentic. Why? Because you've got a distinctive license associated with it. But on the other hand, when it's non-commercial, it means that you can use that software for free. All right, so there's a distinctive difference there, and I think it's quite imperative for you to begin to understand that this is directly linked, but arguably not the same, with what they call open source and closed source software. So remember, open source technically while the whole concept is free software or free licensing, but what you need to look at with open sources means that you can change the code, or you can change the software to suit your own individual environments, and you typically are allowed to do so. But when you look at closed source software, on the other hand, you use as is. And I think this, to some extent, can also be likened to off the shelf software, where you just walk into a specific authorized or registered store that typically sells these software packages. You buy, and arguably when you buy, you're buying the license fit and fine, but you use the package as is. You cannot panel beat it, you cannot change it, you cannot modify it to your own distinctive needs. So that's what closed software is, or closed source software is all about. But on the other hand, like we mentioned a couple of moments back, your open source software is something that you can modify, and remember, once you modify, you can also then distribute without distinctive issues. So the whole concept is making sure that when you talk about commercialized software, or commercial licensing rather, you can't make illegal copies. All right. But on the other hand, when you look at non-commercial, when you look at open source, you can distribute without distinctive problems and issues there. So I think what you can also do from a research platform, look at the whole concept, or differentiate, or more or less discuss the whole concept of off-the-shelf software as well as bespoke software. The other thing that you also want to look at is understanding the whole concept of open source versus closed source versus commercial versus non-commercial software packages there. So with licensing, I think that's the main thing that you need to take cognizance of. The other thing as well is, especially when you're using commercial software, is what they call the EULA, or the end user license agreement. So this is, I think most of you might have seen this when we were running that practical session in class, when we were installing Windows 10 on our computer systems. One of the windows showed, or one of the actual platforms during the course of installation showed a license agreement that you had to read and agree to first before you could proceed. So normally what is incorporated, most people don't read this, but it's ultimately important, because from a legal point of view, this is what can put you in a bit of a rut if you then end up distributing this software in illegally, or making illegal copies that I mentioned earlier on. So this is just making sure that you understand the whole concept of what the license is all about, and you're using that software appropriately, or in the right environments, and obviously not detrimentally affecting yourself as an individual or organization as far as that particular package is concerned. And then the other thing now, as far as this particular end user license agreement is concerned, is what they call the DRM, or Digital Rights Management Platform. So this now enforces the license that you'd have agreed to, as far as basic installation procedures would go. So I think that's what's quite relevant when you look at it from a licensing perspective. When you end up developing your own particular packages, your own particular apps, and so on, understand the legal implications of these particular licenses, understand the whole concept of the differences, like I was saying, between commercial, which is something that you buy, non-commercial, something that you use for free, open source, which is something that you can modify, closed source, which is something that you cannot, bespoke, which is software that is typically customized to your own specific environments, or to an individual institution's environment. And then obviously off the shelf is something that you use typically as is, as far as environments would go. So look through licensing. I will be sending a couple of questions, just to make sure that you do research appropriately. But maybe just to repeat myself, what I mentioned a couple of moments ago, look at discuss the whole concept of open source versus closed source, your commercial versus non-commercial, and again the whole concept of differentiating between bespoke and off-the-shelf software platforms there. All right, so that's pretty much that. I don't want to go too much into detail in terms of the other section, because remember the next part is going to be delving into network security. But just to avoid information overload and obviously cramming too much data within one specific session, we will have another session which is going to be discussing the whole concept of network security, and then also delving into ways and means in which you can typically safeguard yourself against unauthorized access, against obviously massive abuse in terms of usage of the data that is stored and the actual gadgets that you'd use within your own standalone as well as a networked environments there. So technically what it would mean is we would have part four, which is arguably going to be the conclusive part. If need be, maybe we might throw in another part there, which is part five. But then I think arguably that one is more or less looking at more of research, more of revision as well, dependent on the kind of feedback I'll get from you in terms of content there. So there it is, guys. Again, keep well, stay safe, be of good spirits, and keep smiling. See you in the next one. Cheers.